1 week before his 18th birthday, my grandson told me, "The best birthday gift would be so we can finally split the money." The next morning, I dissolved the family estate, disinherited every single relative, and disappeared quietly. What I left on his desk. It shattered the whole family. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Dolores, and I am 66 years old. For 5 years since Harold died, I thought I had been building something beautiful with my family. I thought the love I poured into them, the sacrifices I made, the money I spent, were investments in relationships that mattered. I was wrong. You know what, Grandma? The best birthday gift you could give me would be if you just died already so we could finally split the money. Those words came from my 17-year-old grandson, Axel, as he lounged in my kitchen, eating cereal from a bowl that cost more than some people make in a week. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. His spoon clinked against the fine china as he spoke, the sound echoing in my chest like a funeral bell. I was standing at the stove, making his favorite blueberry pancakes for what I thought was a sweet grandmother-grandson breakfast. The batter was perfectly mixed, the griddle heated to just the right temperature. Steam rose from the pan, carrying the warm scent of vanilla and butter that usually filled our kitchen with comfort. But in that moment, everything turned cold. My hand froze on the spatula. The pancake I was flipping fell back into the pan with a wet slap. I felt something inside me crack, not like glass breaking, but like ice forming in my veins. For 66 years, I had lived believing that family meant something, that blood created bonds that couldn't be broken. That love, real love, existed between the people who shared your name and your history. "What did you just say?" I whispered, turning around slowly. Axel didn't even look up from his phone. He was scrolling through something, probably calculating how much money he would inherit when I was gone. His dark hair fell across his forehead the same way his grandfather Harold's used to, but there was none of Harold's warmth in those eyes. They were cold, calculating, predatory. "Come on, Grandma, don't act all shocked. We all know you're getting old. Mom and Dad are always talking about how much money we'll have when you're gone. You've had a good run." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This was the child I had helped raise, the boy I had taken to baseball games, bought expensive cleats for, paid for his private school tuition when his parents claimed they couldn't afford it. This was the grandson who had sat on my lap just a few years ago, listening to stories about his grandfather, promising he would always take care of his grandma when she got old. I reached into my apron pocket and felt the small digital recorder I always carried. It was a habit I had developed after Harold died, recording conversations with lawyers, doctors, anyone who might later claim I had misunderstood something important. Being a widow had taught me to protect myself with evidence. My fingers found the record button and pressed it silently. "Axel, honey, that's a terrible thing to say. You don't really mean that." He finally looked up, and I saw something in his expression that chilled me to the bone. Impatience, like I was a slow waitress taking too long to bring his order. "Look, Grandma, let's be real here. You're 66. You've been sick a lot lately. Mom says you're probably going to need a nursing home soon anyway, and that's just going to eat up all the money. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if you just, went peacefully? Then me, Mom, and Dad could actually use the money for important stuff. I want to buy a Tesla when I turn 18 next week. Do you know how much those cost?" I knew exactly how much they cost. $60,000. I knew because Axel had been hinting about wanting one for months, and I had actually been considering it as his 18th birthday gift. The irony made my stomach turn. "Important stuff," I repeated, my voice hollow. "And I suppose keeping your grandmother alive isn't important." He shrugged, the gesture so casual it felt like a physical slap. "You've lived your life already. I'm just getting started. Besides, "What are you even doing with all that money? You just sit around this big house all day. At least we would do something fun with it." The pancakes were burning. I could smell them, but I couldn't move. I stood there watching my grandson, this young man I had loved unconditionally, reduce my entire existence to an inconvenient obstacle between him and a sports car. "Your parents feel the same way?" I asked quietly. "Are you kidding? Dad's been researching nursing homes for months. He found this place in Florida that only costs like $3,000 a month. Mom says once you're there, you'll probably forget all about us anyway, so it'll be like a win-win situation." $3,000 a month. I was currently giving this family $8,000 every month to cover their mortgage, car payments, credit cards, and Axel's allowance. $8,000 that came from the life insurance money Harold had left me. Money that was supposed to last me through my golden years. I thought about Harold then, about how he used to sit in that very chair where Axel now sat, reading me the morning paper over coffee. Harold would bring me wildflowers from the garden and tell me I was still as beautiful as the day he married me. He would never have imagined that the grandson who carried his name would someday sit in his chair and wish for his wife's death. "Grandma, the pancakes are burning." Axel's voice snapped me back to the present. I turned off the burner and stared down at the blackened pancakes, seeing them as a perfect metaphor for this conversation. Something that started sweet and promising, ruined by carelessness and cruelty. I scraped the burnt pancakes into the garbage disposal, the grinding sound masking the tears that were starting to fall. When I turned back around, Axel was gone. His empty cereal bowl sat on the counter, and I could hear his car starting in the driveway. He had gotten what he came for: breakfast and the opportunity to tell his grandmother she should die for his convenience. And now he was moving on with his day. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of a life I had thought was full of love. The expensive appliances I had bought hoping to create warm family memories. The dining table where we had shared thousands of meals. The photographs on the refrigerator showing birthdays, graduations, holidays. All the moments I had documented believing they were evidence of our bond. But as I looked at those pictures now, I began to see them differently. In every photo, I was the one reaching out. I was the one smiling the biggest, hugging the tightest, giving the most. And everyone else was just going through the motions. I walked to my bedroom and sat heavily on the edge of the bed Harold and I had shared for 44 years. His pillow still carried a faint trace of his aftershave, even after 5 years. I pressed my face into it and let myself cry for the first time since his funeral. When the tears finally stopped, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small leather journal. It was where I had been recording things since Harold died. Not just financial information, but observations about my family that had been troubling me. Patterns I had noticed but dismissed. Comments that seemed cruel, but that I had explained away as jokes or misunderstandings. Now, reading through my own handwriting, I saw the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. This wasn't a family. This was a business arrangement. And I was the cash cow that everyone was waiting to slaughter. I picked up my pen and wrote today's entry. Axel told me the best birthday gift I could give him would be my death so they could split my money. He's 17 years old and already sees me as nothing more than an ATM with an expiration date. As I wrote, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, raw and painful, but it was being joined by something else. Something harder and colder. If my family saw me as nothing more than a source of money, then perhaps it was time to show them what life looked like without that source. I closed the journal and walked to my window, looking out at the garden Harold and I had planted together. The roses were blooming, their red petals bright against the green leaves. Harold used to say that roses were proof that beautiful things could have thorns, that sometimes the most gorgeous flowers were the ones that could draw blood if you weren't careful how you handled them. Standing there, watching those roses sway in the afternoon breeze, I realized that maybe it was time for this particular rose to show her thorns. After all, if they were so eager for me to die, perhaps they should experience what that loss would actually mean. Not the money they expected to inherit, but the void that would be left behind when someone who had given everything finally stopped giving. The digital recorder was still in my pocket, its red light blinking silently. Evidence of what my grandson really thought of me. The first piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. But understanding was just the beginning. What I did with that understanding would determine whether I spent my remaining years as a victim of their greed or as someone who finally learned to protect herself from the people who were supposed to love her most. 3 days after Axel's devastating comment, I made a discovery that changed everything. What I found that Thursday evening wasn't just proof of my family's greed. It was evidence of a calculated conspiracy that had been brewing right under my nose. I had driven to Livia and Quentin's house to drop off some documents they needed for their mortgage refinancing. Documents I was helping them with because they claimed they couldn't afford the lawyer fees. The irony of that wasn't lost on me now, knowing they were simultaneously planning my demise so they could inherit money they thought I had. Their house was a modest 2-story colonial that I had helped them buy 8 years ago with a $40,000 down payment. The mortgage payments, insurance, and most of their monthly bills came directly from my checking account. Standing on their front porch with an envelope full of financial paperwork, I realized I was literally holding the evidence of how completely I had supported this family. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Livia's car was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in the living room, so I knew they were home. I tried knocking, then decided to use the spare key they had given me years ago for emergencies. After all, I was practically paying for the house. As I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Familiar voices, but speaking in tones I had never heard before. Low, urgent, conspiratorial. My daughter Livia, my son-in-law Quentin, and unmistakably, my grandson Axel. I should have announced myself. I should have called out and let them know I was there. Instead, something made me freeze in place and listen. Later, I would realize it was self-preservation instinct finally kicking in after years of willful blindness. The thing is, we need to be smart about this, Quentin was saying. His voice carried that tone he used when discussing business deals, calculated and cold. We can't just wait around hoping she dies naturally. She could live another 20 years, and by then, there won't be anything left. Especially if she needs long-term care, Livia added. Do you know how much those places cost? We could lose everything. My heart stopped. They were talking about me like I was a stock portfolio they needed to liquidate before it lost value. So, what are you suggesting? Axel asked, and I could hear the eagerness in his 17-year-old voice. The same voice that used to call me the best grandma in the world. I'm saying we need to encourage her to make some changes, Quentin continued. Get her to move into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney, claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances. I pressed myself against the wall, my hand covering my mouth to keep from gasping audibly. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were planning to have me declared incompetent so they could steal my money while I was still alive. How do we do that? Livia asked. She's sharp as a tack. Everyone knows it. Not everyone, Quentin said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I've been documenting incidents, little things, times when she forgot something or seemed confused about dates. I've been building a file. What kind of file? Axel wanted to know. Medical records, mostly. I found out that Dr. Peterson retired last year, so Mom's been seeing a new doctor. Someone who doesn't know her history. I've been going with her to appointments and guiding the conversation, mentioning that we're concerned about her memory, her decision-making abilities. My blood turned to ice. Quentin had been sabotaging my medical care, planting seeds of doubt about my mental capacity with a doctor who didn't know me well enough to see through the manipulation. That's brilliant, Livia breathed. How long before we can make it official? A few more months, maybe. The key is to be gradual about it. We can't rush this process or it'll look suspicious. What about the money? Axel asked. How much are we really talking about here? I held my breath, waiting to hear their assessment of my net worth. What I heard next nearly knocked me to the floor. Well, there's the house, obviously. That's worth at least $500,000 now, Quentin said. Then there's the investment accounts, savings, the life insurance money from Harold. Last I checked, we're looking at close to $3 million total. $3 million. They thought I was worth $3 million. The truth was, I had about $800,000 left. The rest, Harold's life insurance money, our retirement savings, everything we had built over 44 years of marriage, had been spent on this family. Private school for Axel, Livia, and Quentin's mortgage, car payments, vacations, emergency expenses, medical bills, and countless other demands that had slowly drained my resources. But I had never told them how much I had actually spent. I had never wanted them to feel guilty about accepting my help. So they continued to believe I was sitting on a fortune that simply didn't exist anymore. $3 million, Axel whistled softly. That's enough for my Tesla, plus college, plus whatever I want after that. Don't forget we have expenses too, Livia reminded him. Dad and I have been struggling to keep up with everything. This house, the cars, our credit cards. We need that money just as much as you do. There's enough for everyone, Quentin said diplomatically. The important thing is making sure we get control of it before she does something stupid with it. Like what? Livia asked. Like giving it to charity, or deciding to travel the world, or worse, getting remarried. You know how these lonely old women are. They're vulnerable to smooth-talking men who want to take advantage of them. The irony was staggering. They were worried about someone else taking advantage of me while they were actively plotting to do exactly that. So what's our timeline? Axel pressed. I'm thinking we start putting more pressure on her after your birthday next week, Quentin said. We'll start suggesting that living alone isn't safe for someone her age. Maybe mention a few incidents where she seemed confused or forgetful. Get her used to the idea that she needs more help than she's been admitting. And then, Livia prompted, then we help her choose a nice facility, somewhere comfortable but not too expensive. We want to preserve as much of the estate as possible. What if she refuses? Axel asked. She won't have a choice if she's been declared incompetent, Quentin explained patiently, like he was teaching a business seminar. Once we have power of attorney, we make all the decisions. Where she lives, how her money gets spent, everything. I had heard enough, more than enough. I backed quietly toward the front door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the lock and slipped back outside. Sitting in my car in their driveway, I stared at the house I had helped them buy, processing what I had just learned. This wasn't a family meeting about normal concerns. This was a calculated conspiracy to defraud me, to steal my independence, and to warehouse me in some cheap facility while they lived off the money I had spent 44 years earning and saving. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the methodical, business-like way they had discussed destroying my life. There was no emotion in their voices, no guilt or hesitation. They talked about having me declared incompetent, the same way they might discuss refinancing a loan or choosing a vacation destination. I thought about Axel's comment 3 days earlier, about how the best birthday gift would be my death. Now I understood that death would actually be inconvenient for them. They needed me alive but helpless, a cash cow they could milk until every last penny was gone. As I drove home through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where I had lived for 23 years, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The grief and shock from Axel's comment were still there, but they were being joined by something harder and more dangerous. Clarity. For the first time in years, I was seeing my family with absolute clarity, not through the lens of love and hope and willful blindness, but with the sharp focus of someone who had finally stopped making excuses for inexcusable behavior. They thought I was a naive old woman who could be easily manipulated. They thought I was so desperate for their love that I would never question their motives or protect myself from their schemes. They thought I was weak, vulnerable, and stupid. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Back in my house, I went to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my important papers. Behind my birth certificate and social security card was something I had hoped I would never need: a second will. One I had written and had notarized 5 years ago, right after Harold died, when I was feeling paranoid about making sure my affairs were in order. This will was very different from the one my family knew about. The official will that my lawyer had filed left everything to Livia and, through her, to Axel. But this second document, this insurance policy I had created in a moment of widow's caution, had a very different beneficiary list. I pulled out the sealed envelope and held it in my trembling hands. Inside was a document that would change everything. A document that represented a choice I had hoped I would never have to make. But after what I had overheard tonight, I realized this wasn't really a choice at all. It was survival. I opened my journal and wrote, "They think I have $3 million. They have no idea I've already spent most of it on them. They're planning to have me declared incompetent and steal what's left. They think I'm weak and confused and easy to manipulate." I paused, pen hovering over the page, then added, "They're wrong about everything. And they're about to find out exactly how wrong." Tomorrow was Friday. Next week, Axel would turn 18 and expect his $50,000 birthday gift. The week after that, they planned to begin their campaign to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized. But I had plans of my own now. Plans they couldn't imagine and wouldn't see coming until it was far too late to stop them. After all, they wanted to treat me like a foolish old woman who didn't understand what was happening around her. Perhaps it was time to show them just how much this foolish old woman had been understanding all along. The morning after discovering my family's conspiracy, I woke with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering if I was being too sensitive or misinterpreting their behavior. I had heard the truth with my own ears, recorded it on my digital device, and now I knew exactly where I stood. I was no longer their beloved grandmother and mother. I was their mark. But what they didn't know was that their mark had been watching them much longer than they had been watching me. While they thought they were being clever with their little schemes, I had been documenting their behavior in my journal for months. Every cruel comment dismissed as a joke, every financial demand justified as a temporary need, every manipulation disguised as concern for my welfare. I had just been too afraid to believe what the evidence was telling me. Now I was ready to conduct my own test. I started with Livia. My daughter called that Friday morning, as she did every week, ostensibly to check on my well-being, but really to monitor my financial situation. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Her voice carried that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Actually, I'm worried about something," I said, settling into Harold's old chair with my morning coffee. "I had a meeting with my financial advisor yesterday, and he told me something disturbing." I hadn't had any such meeting, of course, but I needed to see how quickly the news would travel through my family network. "What kind of something?" Livia's voice sharpened with interest. "Well, you know how I've been helping you and Quentin with the mortgage and other expenses?" I paused, letting the question hang. It turns out I may have been more generous than I should have been. "What do you mean?" Now she sounded genuinely worried. "My advisor says at the rate I've been spending, I might need to cut back significantly. He's concerned about my long-term financial security." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Livia finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "How much of a cutback are we talking about? Not, 'Are you okay?' Or, 'What can we do to help?' Just immediate concern about how this might affect their cash flow." He suggested I might need to reduce the monthly support I give you from $8,000 down to maybe $2,000, just until I can get a better handle on my situation. $2,000? Livia's voice pitched higher. Mom, that won't even cover our mortgage payment. We're counting on that money. I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry. But I have to think about my own future, too. What if I need long-term care someday? Those facilities are so expensive. You don't need to worry about that, Livia said quickly. If something happens, we'll take care of you. You don't need to hoard money for some nursing home. Hoard money. As if keeping enough to care for myself in my old age was some kind of character flaw. I hope so, honey. But my advisor says I need to be more careful. He actually suggested I should consider downsizing this house. Maybe move into something smaller, more manageable. Sell the house? Livia's voice was sharp with alarm. Mom, you can't do that. That house has so much sentimental value. Dad built that garden for you. All your memories are there. Interesting how the sentimental value suddenly mattered when it might affect her inheritance. I know it would be hard, I said sadly. But if I sold it, I could invest the money and have a steady income stream. Maybe even increase the support I'm able to give you and Axel. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating whether a lump sum from the house sale might be better than monthly payments. Let me talk to Quentin about this, she said finally. Maybe we can figure out some alternatives. You shouldn't have to make any big decisions like this alone. That's very sweet of you, dear. I was hoping you'd say that. Family should stick together, shouldn't we? After I hung up, I sat back and started the stopwatch function on my phone. I wanted to see how long it would take for this fabricated financial crisis to make its way back to me through other family members. It took exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes. Quentin called first, his voice smooth and concerned in that professional way he used with difficult clients. Dolores, Livia mentioned you're having some financial concerns. I hope you don't mind, but I'd be happy to take a look at your portfolio. Sometimes these financial advisors try to scare older clients into making unnecessary changes. That's very thoughtful of you, Quentin, but I'm not sure I'm ready to share all those details just yet. It feels very personal. Of course. But if you're worried about long-term care costs, there might be some strategies we could explore. Ways to protect your assets while still ensuring you get the care you need. Protect my assets. He meant hide them so I could qualify for government assistance while preserving their inheritance. What kind of strategies? I asked innocently. Well, sometimes it makes sense to transfer assets to family members early. That way they're not counted when determining eligibility for certain programs. It's perfectly legal, and it ensures the money stays in the family where it belongs. Where it belongs. As if money I had earned and saved somehow naturally belonged to them instead of me. That sounds complicated, I said. And wouldn't that mean I'd be giving up control of my own money? Not necessarily. We could set up a trust. Make sure you still have access to what you need while protecting the rest. I know some excellent lawyers who specialize in elder care planning. I'll bet you do, I thought. Lawyers who would help you steal my money legally. Let me think about it, I said. This is all very overwhelming. Of course. But Dolores, please don't make any major decisions without talking to us first. We care about you, and we want to make sure you don't get taken advantage of by people who don't have your best interests at heart. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. 2 hours later, Axel called. My 17-year-old grandson, who had wished for my death less than a week ago, was now suddenly concerned about my financial well-being. Grandma, Mom told me you're having money problems. Is everything okay? I don't know if I'd call them problems exactly. I just need to be more careful about my spending. Does this mean you won't be able to give me the $50,000 for my birthday? There it was. No preamble, no real concern for my situation. Just a direct question about how this might affect his expected windfall. I don't know yet, sweetheart. $50,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we could find a smaller gift that would still make you happy. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. But you promised, he said finally, and I could hear the petulance in his voice. I've been counting on that money. I already picked out the car I want. I know, and I'm sorry. But sometimes circumstances change. Maybe instead of a car, we could look at something more practical. A nice laptop for college or some clothes? A laptop? His voice rose with indignation. Grandma, everyone my age has a laptop. I don't need another laptop. I need a car. Need, I repeated. Axel, you already have a car. The Honda I bought you last year. That piece of junk? It's embarrassing. All my friends have nice cars. I can't pull up to college in a Honda Civic. The Honda Civic that had cost me $22,000, which he now dismissed as a piece of junk because it didn't properly display his status. Honey, there are people your age who would be grateful to have any car at all. Yeah, well, I'm not other people. I'm your grandson. You're supposed to want good things for me. The entitlement was breathtaking. In his mind, my love was directly proportional to the amount of money I was willing to spend on him. If I couldn't afford to buy him a Tesla, it meant I didn't care about his happiness. I do want good things for you, I said quietly. But maybe we have different ideas about what good things means. Whatever, he muttered. I guess I'll have to figure something else out. After he hung up, I sat in Harold's chair for a long time, thinking about the 3 conversations I had just had. My fictional financial crisis had revealed everything I needed to know about my family's true feelings. Not one of them had expressed genuine concern for my well-being. Not one had offered to help me through a difficult time. Their only worry was how my imaginary money problems might affect their access to my very real money. But the most telling part was how quickly they had all jumped to the same solution. I should give them control of my assets, for my own protection. They weren't even being subtle about it anymore. That evening, I called my real financial advisor, Martin Henderson. Martin had been managing Harold's and my investments for 12 years, and he was one of the few people who knew the true state of my finances. Dolores, he said warmly when his secretary put me through. How are you doing? I haven't heard from you since our quarterly review last month. I'm doing well, Martin, but I need to ask you about something. If I wanted to make some significant changes to my estate planning, what would that process look like? What kind of changes are you considering? Let's say I wanted to remove my current beneficiaries and designate new ones. How quickly could that be done? There was a pause. Martin knew my family situation, knew how much I had been supporting Livia and Quentin financially. Is everything all right, Dolores? Everything is becoming very clear, I said, which is different from being all right, but it's progress. Changes like that can be made relatively quickly if you're certain about them. Are you certain? I thought about Axel's casual wish for my death. I thought about the conspiracy meeting I had overheard. I thought about 3 phone calls today that had confirmed everything I had feared about my family's motivations. I'm certain, I said. When can we meet? How about Monday morning, 10 o'clock? Perfect. And Martin, I want you to prepare several different options. I may be making some very substantial changes. After I hung up, I walked through my house, looking at it with new eyes. This house that Livia was so concerned about me selling. The house where Harold and I had built our life together, where we had raised our daughter, where we had dreamed about growing old surrounded by people who loved us. It was still a beautiful house, full of beautiful memories. But it was also a shrine to a life that no longer existed. Harold was gone, and the family I thought we had created together was nothing but an illusion maintained by my monthly financial contributions. Maybe it was time to stop living in a shrine to the past and start building something real for whatever future I had left. In my bedroom, I opened my journal and wrote, Today I tested them. They failed completely. They don't see me as a person with my own needs and fears and rights. They see me as a resource to be managed and eventually consumed. The test is over. Now it's time for the results. Outside my window, the garden Harold and I had planted together was in full bloom. Roses, daisies, hollyhocks, all the flowers we had chosen because they would come back year after year. creating something beautiful that would last. But even the most beautiful garden needed tending, and sometimes tending meant pulling up the weeds that were choking out everything else. Tomorrow was Saturday. Axel's birthday party was next Friday. By then, I needed to have all my pieces in place. Because if my family wanted to treat me like a naive old woman who could be easily manipulated, I was going to show them exactly how naive this old woman really was. By Monday morning, I had made all the necessary appointments. Martin Henderson, my financial advisor. Robert Chen, my estate attorney. Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist whom Martin had recommended. Each of them now had copies of my digital recordings, my journal entries, and a detailed timeline of my family's behavior over the past 6 months. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building an airtight case. The changes to my will were executed by Tuesday. The transfer of assets began on Wednesday. By Thursday, exactly 1 week after I had overheard that devastating conversation in my daughter's kitchen, everything was in place. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear. Axel's 18th birthday. The day he expected to receive $50,000, and instead would learn what happened when you wished for your grandmother's death. I had invited the whole family for dinner to celebrate Axel's milestone birthday. Livia had been thrilled by the invitation, probably thinking it meant I was feeling generous despite my supposed financial concerns. Quentin had volunteered to pick up a cake from the expensive bakery downtown. Axel had been sullen but cooperative, no doubt expecting his Tesla down payment to materialize over dessert. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, all smiles and false affection. Livia brought flowers from the grocery store, chrysanthemums that had cost maybe $12. Quentin carried the expensive cake like it was his generous contribution to the festivities. Axel wore a new shirt that I had probably paid for through his monthly allowance. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, embracing my grandson. He felt tense in my arms, impatient to get through the pleasantries and get to the gift-giving portion of the evening. We made small talk through dinner. Pot roast, Axel's favorite, with mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden Harold and I had planted. The conversation was stilted, artificial. Everyone was performing their role in this family charade, but the underlying tension was palpable. Finally, as I served the cake, Livia brought up what they had all been thinking about. "So, Mom, how did your meeting with the financial advisor go this week? Are things looking any better?" "Actually," I said, cutting precise slices of chocolate cake, "things are looking much clearer. I've made some important decisions about my finances." Quentin leaned forward with interest. "What kind of decisions?" I set down the knife and looked around the table at the 3 people who had spent the last week plotting to steal my independence and my money. Well, I realized that Martin, that's my advisor, was absolutely right about one thing. I have been far too careless with my money. "We told you we'd help you figure out a better plan," Livia said quickly. "You don't have to handle this alone." "That's very generous of you," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "But I've already handled it. I've made some significant changes to protect my assets and ensure my long-term security." Axel finally looked up from his cake, a flicker of worry crossing his face. "What kind of changes?" "Well, first, I've moved most of my liquid assets into a trust that can only be accessed for my medical care and daily living expenses. It's completely protected now." The silence that fell over the table was deafening. I continued cutting cake as if I were discussing the weather. "I've also made arrangements for my ongoing care. If I ever become unable to manage my own affairs, there's a professional guardian service that will step in. I'll never have to worry about being taken advantage of by people who might not have my best interests at heart." Quentin's fork clattered against his plate. "Dolores, that seems a bit extreme. Family should take care of family." "I couldn't agree more," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Family should take care of family. They should protect each other. They should never, ever conspire to steal from each other." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Livia's face went pale. Mom, what are you talking about? I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out my small digital recorder. I set it on the table next to the birthday cake, its silver surface gleaming in the chandelier light. I'm talking about the conversation you had last Thursday evening. The one where you discussed having me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my money. The one where you planned to warehouse me in some cheap facility while you lived off my life savings. Axel's mouth fell open. Quentin started to speak, but I held up my hand. Please, let me finish. I've been very patient, listening to all of you scheme and plot. Now it's your turn to listen. I pressed the play button on the recorder. Quentin's voice filled the dining room, crystal clear and utterly damning. I'm saying we need to encourage her to make some changes. Get her to move into assisted living sooner rather than later. Once she's there, we can get power of attorney, claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances. I let it play for 30 seconds before hitting stop. The silence that followed was absolute. 27 minutes, I said conversationally. That's how long you spent discussing the best way to destroy my life. Very thorough, very detailed, very recorded. Livia was staring at the device like it was a poisonous snake. Mom, you don't understand. We were just worried about you. Worried about me? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to make them all flinch. Let me play another part for you. I fast-forwarded to Axel's voice. 3 million. That's enough for my Tesla, plus college, plus whatever I want after that. Axel went white. Grandma, I didn't mean— Oh, but you did mean it, I interrupted. Just like you meant it when you told me the best birthday gift I could give you would be my death so you could split the money. Yes, I recorded that conversation too. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it beside the recorder. This contains copies of all my recordings, my journal entries documenting your behavior over the past year, and statements from 3 medical professionals confirming that I am of completely sound mind. It also contains copies of the new legal documents I've executed this week. Quentin found his voice first, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. What kind of legal documents? A new will, for starters. The old one left everything to Livia and Axel. This one has different beneficiaries entirely. Who? Livia's voice was barely audible. The American Cancer Society, the local food bank, the children's hospital where I used to volunteer. Organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them. Axel shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You can't do that. That money is supposed to be ours. Actually, I said, still sitting calmly with my hands folded, that money is mine. I earned it. I saved it. And I can leave it to whoever I choose. But we're your family. Livia's voice cracked with desperation. Are you? I asked quietly. Because family members don't usually conspire to steal from each other. Family members don't wish for each other's deaths. Family members don't plot to have their elderly relatives declared incompetent and locked away. We would never have actually gone through with it, Quentin said quickly. We were just discussing options. For 27 minutes, in great detail, including specific timelines and methods. I picked up the recorder again. Would you like me to play the part where you discussed which nursing homes would be cheapest? This is insane, Axel said, his voice rising. You're punishing us for having a private conversation. A private conversation about destroying my life and stealing my money, I replied. Yes. I suppose I am punishing you for that. I stood up slowly, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos erupting around me. There's more, I said. I've also made arrangements for my monthly financial support to end immediately. The $8,000 I've been giving you each month? That stops today. Livia gasped. Mom, we can't afford— You'll figure it out, I said. After all, you're both capable adults. You managed before I started helping you, and you can manage again. You're destroying this family, Quentin accused, his professional composure finally cracking. No, I said firmly. You destroyed this family when you decided to see me as nothing more than a source of money. When you taught your son that his grandmother's death would be a birthday gift. When you plotted to steal my independence and dignity. I walked to the window and looked out at Harold's garden, where the roses were still blooming despite the approaching autumn. I loved you, I said without turning around. All of you. I would have given you anything you needed, supported you through any crisis, been there for you no matter what. All I wanted in return was to be treated with basic respect and decency. Mom, please, Livia was crying now. We can fix this. We can start over. I turned back to face them, and I felt something settle in my chest. Something that might have been peace. No, I said. We can't, because this isn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This is who you are, who you've always been. I just finally stopped making excuses for you. Axel was staring at me with something approaching hatred. So that's it? You're just going to cut us off completely? You cut yourselves off, I replied. The moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. I walked to the front door and opened it, the cool evening air rushing into the house. I think it's time for you to leave now. Take your cake with you. I won't be needing it anymore. They filed out in stunned silence, Quentin carrying the expensive cake like a prop from a play that had ended badly. Livia paused at the door, tears streaming down her face. Mom, this isn't how families are supposed to work. You're right, I said quietly. Families are supposed to love and protect each other. They're supposed to treasure the time they have together. They're supposed to see each other as precious, not as obstacles to overcome. I started to close the door, then paused. Happy birthday, Axel, I called out to my grandson, who was standing beside his father's car with his hands clenched into fists. I hope you got everything you deserved tonight. As their car pulled out of my driveway, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. It was done. After 66 years of believing that family was everything, I had finally learned to put myself first. The house felt different now. Quieter, but not empty. Clean, like a fresh start. I walked back to the dining room and looked at the table still set for 4, the birthday cake half eaten, the recorder still sitting beside the flowers that had probably cost $12 and represented the full extent of their gratitude for everything I had given them. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what my life looked like without them in it. Tonight, I would sit in Harold's chair and remember what it felt like to be truly loved by someone who saw me as more than an ATM with an expiration date. But first, I had one more call to make. I picked up my phone and dialed Martin Henderson's number. Martin? It's Dolores. Yes, I know it's late. I wanted you to know that the family meeting went exactly as expected. You can proceed with the final transfers we discussed. When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, their demands, their constant emotional manipulation was finally off my shoulders. I was free, and it felt exactly like the gift they had never bothered to give me. Unconditional love and acceptance, starting with myself. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. Saturday and Sunday passed in blissful quiet. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no manipulative text messages. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning without the weight of their expectations crushing down on me. I made coffee for one, read the newspaper without interruption, and tended Harold's garden without anyone commenting on how I was overdoing it for someone my age. It was the most peaceful weekend I'd had since Harold died. But Monday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting. The first call came at 7:15 while I was watering the roses. Livia's number flashed on my phone screen, and I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later, then another. By 8 o'clock, she had called 12 times. I finally answered on the 13th ring. Mom, thank God. Her voice was frantic, desperate. We need to talk. This whole thing is a misunderstanding. What part is the misunderstanding? I asked, settling into Harold's chair with my coffee. The part where you planned to have me declared mentally incompetent, or the part where you wanted to steal my money? We weren't going to steal anything, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. We were trying to protect you. Protect me from what? Having control over my own life? Mom, you don't understand how vulnerable you are. There are people out there who prey on elderly women. We were just making sure that didn't happen to you. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. You mean people like you? That's not fair. We're your family. Everything we did was out of love. Love, I repeated. Is that what you call it when your 17-year-old grandson tells his grandmother that her death would be the best birthday gift she could give him? Axel is just a kid. He doesn't understand what he's saying. He understood it well enough to calculate how much money he'd inherit. He understood it well enough to pick out a Tesla he wanted to buy with my death benefits. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the ugly truths neither of us could take back. Mom, please, Livia whispered. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm just finally seeing what was already destroyed. After I hung up, I made myself a second cup of coffee and sat down to check my voicemails. There were 17 of them, Livia pleading, Quentin trying to sound reasonable and professional, Axel, surprisingly, saying nothing at all. But it was the 18th message that caught my attention, a voice I didn't recognize. Mrs. Dolores Patterson, this is Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services. We've received some concerning reports about your welfare, and we'd like to schedule a wellness check at your earliest convenience. My blood ran cold. They hadn't wasted any time. I immediately called Martin Henderson. Dolores, he said, answering on the first ring. I've been expecting your call. You've gotten some interesting visitors this morning, haven't you? How did you know? Because they called me first. Your son-in-law wanted to know if there was any way to contest the changes you made to your estate. He seemed very concerned about your mental state. And what did you tell him? I told him that I've been working with you for 12 years, that you're as sharp as ever, and that any attempts to question your competency would be met with the full documentation we've prepared, including those recordings. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. What about this elder care advocacy thing? Standard procedure when someone files a concern report. Don't worry, Dr. Williams is expecting their call. She's prepared to conduct any competency evaluation they might request. Dr. Patricia Williams, the geriatric psychiatrist Martin had recommended. We'd spent 2 hours together on Wednesday, during which she'd conducted a comprehensive mental status examination and declared me not only competent, but remarkably well-adjusted for someone dealing with family exploitation. How long will this go on? I asked. Until they realize they have no legal standing and no chance of success. Your documentation is airtight, Dolores. They can't prove you're incompetent because you're not. And they can't contest your right to change your will because it's your money to do with as you please. After I hung up with Martin, I decided to take a drive. I needed to get out of the house, away from the phone, away from the memories of Friday night's confrontation. I found myself driving to the cemetery where Harold was buried, something I hadn't done since the anniversary of his death 6 months ago. His headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription we'd chosen together. Beloved husband and father. I sat on the small bench nearby and told him about everything that had happened. You would have been so disappointed in them, I said to the quiet air. Especially Axel. You had such hopes for him. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree shading Harold's grave, and I found myself remembering the man I'd married 50 years ago. He'd been 21 when we met, working construction to pay for night school. He'd had calloused hands and big dreams, and he'd loved me with a fierce protectiveness that never felt controlling. You always said family was everything, I continued. But you meant real family. People who chose to love each other, not just people who happened to share DNA. When I got home, there were 3 cars in my driveway. Livia's Honda, Quentin's BMW, and a small silver sedan I didn't recognize. Through my living room window, I could see people sitting on my front porch. I parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen, hoping to avoid the confrontation waiting outside. But before I could even set down my purse, the doorbell rang, and rang, and rang. Finally, I opened the door to find not just my family, but a well-dressed woman in her 40s carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of professionally sympathetic expression that social workers perfected. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Amanda Morrison from Elder Care Advocacy Services. These are your family members, I believe." "Unfortunately," I said, "we're here to conduct a welfare check. Your family has expressed some concerns about your recent behavior and decision-making capacity." I looked past her to where Livia, Quentin, and Axel stood clustered together like conspirators. Livia's eyes were red from crying. Quentin looked like he was trying to solve a complex business problem. Axel just looked sullen and angry. "What kind of concerns?" I asked Amanda Morrison. "They've reported that you've been making erratic financial decisions, that you've become paranoid and suspicious of family members who are trying to help you, and that you may be suffering from some form of dementia or age-related cognitive decline." I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please come in, all of you." We assembled in my living room like opposing armies. Amanda Morrison sat in the center with her clipboard, while my family arranged themselves on the couch across from Harold's chair, where I settled with my hands folded calmly in my lap. "Mrs. Patterson," Amanda began, "your family is concerned that you've recently made some significant changes to your estate planning and financial arrangements. Can you tell me about that?" "Certainly. I discovered that my family was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my money and put me in a nursing home. So I took steps to protect myself." Amanda's pen paused over her clipboard. "That's a very serious accusation." "Yes, it is. Would you like to hear the recordings?" I reached for my purse, but Quentin interrupted. "See? This is what we're talking about. She's become obsessed with these supposed recordings. She thinks we're all plotting against her." "I don't think you're plotting against me," I said calmly. "I know you are, because I heard you doing it." I pulled out my digital recorder and set it on the coffee table. "Ms. Morrison, would you like to hear exactly what my family said about me when they thought I couldn't hear them?" Amanda looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm not sure that's—" "Please," I interrupted. "I insist. After all, they're the ones who called you here because they're concerned about my mental state. I think you should hear what they really think about me." I pressed play, and Quentin's voice filled my living room. "Once she's there, we can get power of attorney, claim she's not mentally competent to handle her own finances." Amanda's eyes widened. I fast-forwarded to another section. "The key is to be gradual about it. We can't rush this process or it'll look suspicious." By the time I reached Axel's voice discussing how much money he'd inherit when I died, the room was completely silent, except for the damning evidence of their conspiracy. Amanda Morrison looked from the recorder to my family and back to me. "Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been aware of these discussions?" "I've been documenting concerning behavior for months," I said. "But I overheard this particular conversation last Thursday evening, the day before I changed my will." "You changed your will in response to this?" "I protected myself in response to this. Wouldn't you?" Amanda turned to Livia. "Ma'am, is this recording accurate?" Livia's face was red with embarrassment and anger. "It's taken completely out of context. We were just discussing what would happen if Mom needed care. Every family has these conversations." "Do they?" Amanda asked. "Do most families discuss having elderly relatives declared incompetent and placed in the cheapest possible facilities?" "We would never actually do that," Quentin said quickly. "We were just exploring options." "For 27 minutes, I added, "with very specific timelines and strategies." Amanda made several notes on her clipboard, then looked back at me. "Mrs. Patterson, can you tell me about the financial changes you've made?" "I moved most of my assets into a protected trust that can only be used for my care." I appointed a professional guardian service to oversee my affairs if I ever become unable to do so myself. And I changed my will to leave my estate to charitable organizations instead of to people who see me as an obstacle to their inheritance. And you made these decisions voluntarily, without any outside pressure or influence? Completely voluntarily. In fact, I made them specifically to avoid outside pressure and influence. Amanda spent another 20 minutes asking me questions about my daily activities, my medication management, my social connections. I answered everything clearly and thoroughly, occasionally referencing my journal when I needed specific dates or details. Finally, she closed her clipboard and stood up. Mrs. Patterson, based on this interview, I see no evidence of cognitive decline, dementia, or impaired decision-making capacity. You appear to be a competent adult who has made rational choices to protect yourself from family members who were, frankly, planning to exploit you. Livia shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. You're just going to take her word for everything? I'm going to take the evidence, Amanda said firmly, including the recordings of your family planning to defraud an elderly relative. Mrs. Patterson, would you like me to file a report about these threats? I considered it for a moment, looking at the three people who had once been the center of my world. They looked frightened now, desperate, like cornered animals. No, I said finally. I don't want to file charges. I just want them to leave me alone. Amanda nodded. I'll note that in my report. But I have to advise you that if this behavior continues, if there are any further attempts to harass or intimidate you, you should contact law enforcement immediately. After Amanda left, my family and I faced each other across the living room that had once been filled with birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Sunday dinners. Are you happy now? Axel asked, his voice bitter. You've turned everyone against us. I didn't turn anyone against you, I said. I just stopped pretending that what you were doing was acceptable. This isn't over, Quentin said, his professional mask slipping completely. You can't just cut off your own family. Watch me, I replied. They left without another word, and I locked the door behind them. Then I walked to Harold's chair, sat down, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. The worst was over. They had played their last card and lost. Now I could begin the rest of my life. But first, I had one more recording to make. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. Robert, it's Dolores. I want to add a codicil to my will. If anyone in my family challenges the estate or attempts to have me declared incompetent, they forfeit any right to contest the charitable donations. I want to make sure they understand that fighting me will only make things worse for them. Consider it done, he said. Dolores, are you all right? I looked around my quiet house, at the photos of Harold and me, at the garden visible through the window where roses bloomed without anyone telling me I was too old to tend them. I'm perfect, I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it. 7 months later, I was standing in my new kitchen, making coffee for two. The morning sun streamed through windows that faced east instead of west, illuminating a space that was smaller, but somehow felt infinitely larger than the house I'd left behind. I had sold the family home 3 weeks after the confrontation, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the freedom. Every room in that house had been haunted by memories of people who had never really loved me, and ghosts of the woman I used to be, the one who had confused financial support with maternal obligation. My new home was a charming 2-bedroom cottage in a retirement community called Willowbrook Gardens. It wasn't one of those sterile institutional places my family had researched. Instead, it was a vibrant neighborhood of independent seniors who had chosen to live near each other for companionship and security, not because they needed care. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 o'clock, as it did every Tuesday morning. "Good morning, sunshine," called Margaret Winters as she let herself in with the spare key I'd given her. Margaret was 72, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down and had become my closest friend in this new life I'd built. "Morning, Maggie," I called back, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs I'd bought at a local pottery shop. Ready for our adventure? We had started taking day trips together 6 weeks after I'd moved in. Today we were driving to a small town 90 minutes away that was famous for its antique shops and farmers market. Simple pleasures, but they felt revolutionary after years of scheduling my life around other people's demands. "Did you see the article in this morning's paper?" Maggie asked, settling at my kitchen table with her coffee. She pulled out a folded newspaper and pointed to a small item in the local section. "Axel Patterson, 18, arrested for drunk driving. Vehicle impounded." The article was only 3 sentences long, but it told a complete story. I felt nothing. No urge to call and offer to help. No guilt about not being there to bail him out. No responsibility for cleaning up the mess he'd made. "You okay?" Maggie asked gently. She knew my history, knew why I'd moved here and cut contact with my family. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it completely. It had taken time to reach this point. The first month after the confrontation had been difficult, filled with moments when I'd almost picked up the phone to call Livia, when I'd caught myself setting the table for 4 people instead of 1. 66 years of programmed responses don't disappear overnight. But gradually, the silence had stopped feeling empty and started feeling peaceful. The absence of crisis had stopped feeling strange and started feeling normal. The freedom to make my own choices without considering everyone else's reactions had stopped feeling selfish and started feeling healthy. "Any word from your daughter?" Maggie asked as we got ready to leave. "She stopped calling about 2 months ago," I said, gathering my purse and jacket. "I think she finally realized I wasn't going to change my mind." There had been a few desperate attempts at reconciliation. Livia had sent a birthday card in January, my 67th birthday, with a long letter claiming she understood now how wrong they'd been, how much they missed me, how they'd learned their lesson. But the letter had been full of subtle hints about their financial struggles, carefully worded suggestions that maybe I could help just a little while they got back on their feet. I had thrown it away without responding. Quentin had tried a more direct approach, showing up at my old house before realizing I'd sold it. The new owners had given him my lawyer's contact information, and Robert Chen had informed him that any further attempts to contact me would be considered harassment. Axel had done nothing. No calls, no letters, no attempts at apology. In a strange way, his silence was the most honest response of all. He had never really known me as a person, only as a source of money. Without that function, I simply didn't exist for him. And that was fine with me. Maggie and I drove through the countryside, past farms and forests that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. She told me about her grandchildren, real grandchildren who called her because they wanted to hear her voice, not because they needed money. Children who visited because they enjoyed her company, who brought her drawings they'd made at school and stayed for lunch just to spend time together. "You know what I realized?" I said as we pulled into the farmer's market parking lot. "I spent so many years mourning the family I thought I had that I never allowed myself to build the life I actually wanted." "And what did you want?" Maggie asked. I thought about it as we walked among the vendor booths, past displays of fresh vegetables and homemade preserves and handcrafted jewelry. I wanted to matter to someone, not because of what I could give them, but because of who I was. "And do you matter to someone?" I looked around at the bustling market, at the vendors who knew my name and asked about my week, at the other customers who had become casual friends over the months I'd been coming here, at Maggie, who had invited me to join her book club and her walking group and her volunteer activities at the local animal shelter. "Yes," I said, "I matter to me, and that turns out to be enough." We spent the morning browsing through antique shops, not looking for anything in particular, but enjoying the stories behind old photographs and vintage jewelry and furniture that had outlasted the families who'd once owned it. I bought a small wooden box that had once held someone's treasured letters, thinking I might use it to store the journal entries I'd been writing about this new chapter of my life. Over lunch at a small cafe, Maggie asked the question I'd been expecting for months. Do you ever regret it? Cutting them off completely? I considered this while I ate my soup and watched the other diners around us. Couples who held hands across the table. Families where the conversation flowed naturally, where laughter seemed genuine instead of performed. People who clearly enjoyed each other's company. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I regret that I spent so many years making excuses for inexcusable behavior. I paused, then added, but I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret choosing my own well-being over their convenience. And I don't regret discovering what my life could be like when it's actually mine. On the drive home, I told Maggie about the letter I'd received the previous week from the children's hospital. They'd used part of my donation to fund a new playroom in the pediatric ward, and they'd sent photos of children who were dealing with serious illnesses but still finding reasons to smile and laugh and play. That money is doing something beautiful now, I said. It's bringing joy to children who need it instead of funding entitled adults who don't deserve it. Your husband would be proud, Maggie said softly. I thought about Harold, about the man who had loved me unconditionally for 44 years, and never once made me feel like my value was tied to my bank account. If he could see me now, living in a house filled with peace instead of obligation, surrounded by friends who chose my company instead of relatives who tolerated my presence, I knew he would approve. That evening, as I sat in my new favorite chair reading a book I'd chosen for pleasure instead of obligation, my phone rang. For a moment my heart jumped, thinking it might be family news. But the caller ID showed the number for Willowbrook Gardens' main office. Dolores, this is Nancy from the community center. We're still looking for someone to coordinate our holiday gift drive for the local women's shelter. Are you interested? I had been volunteering more since moving here, finding ways to use my time that felt meaningful instead of mandatory. The gift drive would involve organizing donations, coordinating with the shelter staff, and helping to distribute presents to women and children who were starting over after leaving dangerous situations. Women who, like me, had discovered that sometimes walking away from family was the bravest thing you could do. I'd love to help, I said. After I hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the small garden I'd started behind the cottage. It was nothing like the elaborate landscaping Harold and I had created at the old house, but these flowers were mine alone. I had planted them, tended them, watched them grow without anyone commenting on whether I was doing too much for someone my age. Tomorrow, I would start planning the gift drive. Next week, I would take another day trip with Maggie, maybe visit that art museum she'd been talking about. Next month, I would host Thanksgiving dinner for my book club friends, creating new traditions that had nothing to do with obligation or guilt or financial manipulation. I had no idea what my family was doing for the holidays. I didn't know if Axel had learned anything from his drunk driving arrest, or if Livia and Quentin had figured out how to manage their finances without my monthly contributions. I didn't know if they thought about me, missed me, or had already moved on to some other source of support. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I was 67 years old, and I was finally living for myself. I had friends who valued my opinions, activities that energized me, and a future that stretched ahead filled with possibilities instead of obligations. I thought about Axel's cruel comment that had started this whole journey. The best birthday gift you could give me would be if you just died already so we could finally split the money. In a way, he had been right. The woman who had lived to serve their needs, who had confused love with financial support, who had accepted scraps of affection in exchange for constant giving, that woman had died. And what had risen from her ashes was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable. Someone who had finally learned that the most important relationship you can have is the one you have with yourself. Standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, surrounded by my own choices, I raised my coffee mug in a toast to the woman I had become. "Happy birthday to me," I said to the empty room that felt fuller than any crowded family gathering ever had. And somewhere, I was sure Harold was smiling. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.